I think he's a real breath of fresh air. I really admire him. I think he's a profoundly British figure.
In what sense?
There's a great book by A.J.P. Taylor called The Troublemakers, and it's about the dissident tradition in British foreign policy making. And it traces it back to Tom Paine, Bright, Keir Hardie, and Lansbury. He's clearly in that, purely in that tradition. Hostile, radical, hostile to the establishment policy machine. Until he arrived, there was this consensus shared by the media and by the main political parties that the political opposition was abolished. The task of an opposition was to resemble the government as much as it could. And to actually have a man who believes a party which doesn't have to agree automatically with the government of the day is incredible, it's glorious. And so all I'm trying to do is to write about him fairly and also celebrate him in a way. I mean, I think that we will look back on Mr. Corbyn as a wonderful change to a political system which had got completely atrophied and ceased really to represent the British people.
Do you think he's being unfairly attacked, even smeared at the moment?
And there's a collaboration between the mainstream media and the Conservative Party and the massive of Labour MPs to make a whole series, to distort anything intelligent which Mr. Corbyn says. It's such an outrage.
Why are they trashing him?
I think there are two things. One is the herd mentality of the kind of Westminster media. I think that Mr. Corbyn does challenge the system. The people who run the show are big business in terms of domestic policy, and the Americans in terms of foreign policy. The dissidence is not really tolerated, and if you can look how effective the system is, just think about the people who opposed the Iraq War, see how they did, and people who were in favour of the Iraq War, you know, they're still running the show.
Yeah.
And so there's no punishment. Yeah, there's no penitence, no punishment. And Jeremy Corbyn, well, I know he's made a lot of mistakes, but I think his foreign policy stuff is fascinating. Let's remember, he was right about Iraq. More recently, he was right about Libya. It was only about 12 or 13, I think, MPs voted against the Libya debacle. And that's been really probably as great a phenomenal failure as Iraq in its own way.
And yet rarely spoken about.
I mean, at the moment, as we're talking, ISIS are kind of going to be marching on Benghazi. I mean, they're just taking one town after another at the moment. Again and again, Jeremy Corbyn has been right about the great foreign policy issues of the day.
The war in Iraq, that was something you were very passionately against. That war only happened because Conservative MPs supported it. 139 Labour MPs voted against, only about 13 or so.
Now, by the way, it's not true. I wasn't passionately against it.
Oh, were you not?
I was sort of, I was shamefully neutral, yes.
Oh, you were neutral, so I'm wrong. I'm wrong.
But what happened afterwards was horrifying, and the revelations about the scale of the deception which preceded it.
Did that change your views then? Is that
it was absolutely devastating. I mean, Chilcot is going to be a very interesting and big moment because we were lied to by the British government about the nature of the threat which Saddam Hussein posed. Now, that's in order to make the case for what was an illegal war. And for me, it was a profound moment because up to that moment I had believed that the British establishment was trustworthy. As a Tory, I would believe that. Ever since then, I have not trusted the state, and and I have become much more sceptical.
Now then, you might imagine the Conservatives will be rubbing their hands with glee at the election of Jeremy Corbyn as Labour leader. But if Mr Corbyn represents some sort of anti-politics sentiment, is there a danger that David Cameron and the rest of them could underestimate him? Well, David Davis is a former minister and former chairman of the Conservative Party, of course, and joins me now. And a very good morning to you, Mr Davis. Do you think, I mean, does that encapsulate the dangers for the Conservative Party, that interaction?
It does entirely. I mean, I think the odds of our winning the next election after yesterday are higher, but I don't think it's an open and shut case by any means. I think complacency will be absolutely the daftest thing to go in for now. So, and you know, you've just had Frank Field on talking about how Jeremy in other circumstances is able to work with other people. You know.
You've worked with him, haven't you?
I worked with him on the Shaka Amir case, on a Guantanamo Bay case, and he's very polite, very courteous, listens to arguments. So we've got to be a bit careful. We certainly don't want to go in for ad hominem attacks. That would be a disaster. But we should also recognise something else, and it's come up a bit in your programme already. He is a part of a worldwide syndrome going on here. People saying, we don't actually like conventional politics. We don't like the managerial politics. It hasn't done us very much good. We've lost money. We've lost our jobs. We're suffering from austerity. That appeals to a lot of people, many of whom probably didn't even vote in the last election.
But a lot of people did say that kind of thing about Nigel Farage, and yes, you got a lot of votes.
They did, but we were saved from Nigel Farage by the electoral system. He got millions of votes and no seats, or one seat, So I think that it's not just here. It's Podema, it's Cyprus, it's all those things, and so we've got to look at it very carefully.
Jeremy Corbyn is obviously standing to be lead the Labour Party. He's unexpectedly gone from 200 to 1 to being the front runner.
This is very funny, isn't it?
What's happened?
It's an awful lot of people sick of being told what to do, and I also think it's because of the observable fact that the Blairite project originated in the kitchens and pantries of Euro-communism has now been taken over by the Conservative Party, and therefore has no need of the Labour Party to continue it. The Labour Party has been freed of its need to be Blairite anymore.
So it's left a vacuum.
So it's in some ways it's a sort of spasm of, all right then, we're free at last, we can do this, as all the Blairite media and the David Miliband's and the Peter Mandelsons come crowding in to say, don't do this. The impulse to say, well, if he says don't do it, that's absolutely what I must do, just grows stronger and stronger, doesn't it?
So a lot of people don't realise you support, for example, you'd prefer public ownership of the railways, for example.
Immediately, yeah. The intervention of the state in a lot of areas is essential. You can manage without it. Even the most, there are wild conservative, liberal free marketeers who say that you don't need a navy, it could be done by sort of privateers, but it's obviously ridiculous. Every state has to intervene in something, and once you've decided you must intervene by creating a navy, then you've pretty much sold the principle, haven't you? The state's obviously useful sometimes.
We certainly didn't know who was going to win the leadership. We are now, forgive me, in completely uncharted waters. So, what is a sensible thing to say? It is possible. Look, there is a view around Westminster that he'll go. Either that he'll walk away because he doesn't like it, or there'll be a coup against him by the Parliamentary Labour Party. I would just caution, and I used to hear about this, the coalition. There's a coalition, it won't last. Luckily I got that one right. On the day the coalition formed, I said this will last 5 years. And I never had any doubt it would last at any stage, and yet it was the utter conventional wisdom that it was doomed. I'm not as confident that Jeremy Corbyn will survive, but I would push in the face of conventional wisdom that he is doomed to fail. Because even if he walks away, which he might, he didn't want the job, and he might not enjoy it that much, the election of his successor would be under the same system and might well produce the same result. But it would just be a different face from the left. So, okay, it's a different guy, but it's not fundamentally changed. If there's to be a coup against him, the centre-right, whatever you want to call the rest of the Labour Party, has to find a candidate. There is no obvious candidate yet. There may be in 2 years. So I don't think it's clear, but the defining event of the next 2 years won't be this anyway, forgive me, it will be the EU referendum. The thing that you'll be talking about if you're remotely interested in news and politics in 30 years' time will not be Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. It will be the EU referendum. Because if the Tories get that wrong, and by wrong I mean Cameron either can't get the deal he wants, can get the deal he wants but can't persuade the country to vote for it, or even if he can get the deal he wants and people to vote for it, the Tory party splits down the middle as they did in the late 80s and 90s on Europe, then Labour are in business. Then the next Prime Minister is still not Labour, bear in mind, because Cameron has promised to stand down, so we've got a guarantee that the next Prime Minister is a Tory, or a virtual guarantee. But Labour are back in business. At that point, Labour might get serious about whether they think Jeremy is a winner. And if they don't think he's a winner, then they may move against it.
It's that whatever you think of Jeremy Corbyn, and the press are all being terribly rude about him, at least he's a socialist. At least he says what he believes. At least there is a conviction.
Are you rooting for the most left-wing candidate?
All I would say is this. I think the public, and I think party memberships are sick to death of the bland politics we've had for the last decade or so, where the left and the right have merged together. They look the same, they sound the same, they all have identical backgrounds, none of them have ever had a job in the real world. And I think Labour Party members are looking at Corbyn and saying, at least this bloke's authentic.
You look at this huge and very fast and unpredicted uprising of supporters that he had during the Labour leadership. Could that be carried on into a general election? Is Jeremy Corbyn a man who could win a general election in this country?
Yes, and we have to face up to that reality.